Great. So brief recap, this webinar is tailored towards warm season lawns, but if you're unsure of your grass type, or if you do know that you have cool season grass, no worries. The majority of this information will still be applicable, and we will be offering an order of operations webinar specifically for cool season lawns later this month. Secondly, keep an eye out for the follow-up email being sent out roughly tomorrow afternoon, containing both the recording of the webinar and the link to the follow-up survey, and submit any questions in the Q&A box for us. And perfect, let's go ahead and get started. So just taking a step back in terms of the general order of operations, right? So with each custom lawn plan subscription, you receive this order of operations essentially, right? And so what we recommend completing is essentially first, controlling weeds, secondly, treating pet spots, thirdly, patching and seeding, fourthly, fertilizing the lawn, and then lastly, controlling pests. But what we'd like to do today is really start to shift our focus a bit and take a bit more of a dynamic lens, right? And so the focus here is really considering that the lawn is a dynamic system, right? We have inputs, this is a living thing, right? And so if we have this better understanding and appreciation of the lawn itself before we even get started with the season, we're going to be better able to respond to any changes and any questions that may arise. So starting off today, we'll chat about lawn preparation, essentially being able to identify, are there certain areas of the lawn which may be slightly different than the others, and how can we essentially prevent these potentially varying factors from impacting the lawn's progress. We'll also discuss weed control today. Ivana and one of our other yard advisors, Andrea, hosted a specific webinar dealing with weeds earlier this week. So that is available either on our calendar or on our YouTube channel to reference. Definitely a great resource, but we'll provide a brief recap today as well. Thirdly, repairing the lawn. So discussing how to repair the lawn, whether it's with seed or a different form of propagation. Fourthly, fertilizing the lawn, essentially how to use the nutrient pouches. And then lastly, maintaining the lawn. How is the lawn going to change over the course of the season? If you do notice any changes, how should you respond, and what's the best course of action? Keep in mind today, though, that the environment is a crucial component of each step over the course of the season, right? And so even if from a fertilizer perspective, for example, even if on your plan it shows that you are set to fertilize from, let's say, April 1st to April 7th, right? If you feel that the environmental conditions would not allow you to do so, then we can certainly adjust that application. Now, we're going to explain which factors we would consider in this webinar, but just keep in mind asking yourself if the environment or if do the conditions essentially allow me to complete these tasks is crucial. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ivana to start off with lawn preparation.
Yeah, so when talking about your lawn, in the spring as everything's starting to warm up, you do want to start, at the beginning. With anything, building a house, you start at the foundation. So something that you want to look at is your soil. Once temperatures get to 60 to 75-ish degrees, that's a good time to kind of start taking stock of what you need to do before you can really get growing this season. One of those things is to check if you need to dethatch your lawn, and this is just removing some of that dead material that kind of stays in the root zone. About half an inch to an inch is a totally fine amount to leave, but before, if your lawn was over fertilized or over watered, you may have a buildup that needs removal. Another thing to think about, especially when you're going to your first mow, is if you need to scalp your lawn. Now, this is only for people with Bermuda or zoysia. People with like a St. Augustine lawn, this is going to damage your lawn. So scalping is only for Bermuda, zoysia, and this is just cutting it shorter than you normally would to remove any of that golden, dead or dormant material so that your grass can grow more healthily over the course of the season. The next thing that you want to take a look at is aerating. Especially, Georgia, Texas, we've got those heavy clay soils, at least, in the hill country. East Texas is a little bit different. But this is something that you just want to check on because grass roots do need oxygen to thrive. And in order to get better water penetration, you want to make sure that that soil is opened up. There is a great test to do. We have a blog article on the shed about it, and it's just a screwdriver test. So get your lawn a little damp, push a screwdriver in. If it's giving you trouble, you're most likely going to need to aerate. The best thing to do would just be rent an aerator from your local hardware store. You You don't really need to buy when you're going to be using it once a year. And they're pretty affordable just to rent. And you'll just need to go over your lawn. It'll pull plugs out. You can rake those back into the soil. And you can actually follow that up with top dressing, which is my favorite lawn practice to do. And that is just adding some compost or topsoil to the top of your lawn. And what this does is kind of just condition your soil over time, as well as provide a nice like blanket of soil in case you are seeding or sodding. This just allows your grass to have a good place to root into. Another thing to look at is after you've gotten your soil test back from us or back from your local extension service, do you need to add lime or sulfur to your lawn? If your pH is anywhere outside of the 4 to 9 range, if it is too basic, you may need to add some sulfur powder. You may need to add some mulch or some peat moss, something that'll bring that pH down. Some nutrients are not accessible in very extreme pH ranges, so you need to make sure that your pH is in that range. One more thing to think about is leveling. I know places that get, a monsoon season, places that have had really irregular precipitation, it may have moved your soil around. You might just need to go through, mix a little bit of topsoil and sand and kind of spread that out evenly. So that way, when you go to seed or sod, it makes it a good environment for your grass. Now, after, yeah, well,
And Ivana, just one question here too. So with one of the questions that we commonly receive is referencing soil salinity levels, right? And gypsum. Now, along with sort of pH changes and everything there, these are all factors that we could discuss in more detail with the ER advisor, right? So if a customer ever had a question, we'd be able to essentially provide recommendations.
For sure, yeah. And gypsum's one of those tricky things. Sometimes you may not need it. You may just need to either irrigate more deeply and frequently. You may just need to add some topsoil or compost. So depending on the soil salinity levels, there's a few different options you have. Yeah. All right. Well, after you have finished all of your soil prep and everything like that, you can kind of move into taking stock of what weeds you have. We're going to look at controlling weeds. So there are a few different things to think about when controlling weeds. First thing you want to think about is the temperature range. So if it is still a little too cold for grass to grow, you might just want to leave those weeds there for a little bit longer, just so you don't have those bare soil spots, because all that's going to do is encourage more weeds to grow, and then you're going to have to keep going through that process. One thing to think about is just as you're going through and mowing your lawn during the first mow of the season, or even when you go to scalp your Bermuda or zoysia for the first time, bag those clippings if you do have a lot of weeds, and mow high. So what this does is when you bag those clippings, you're removing those seeds from the environment. You can compost them. Home compost piles do get hot enough to kind of neutralize those seeds, but you just want to make sure that they are not around your lawn and they won't grow again. Mowing high is another helpful thing because a lot of weeds like to be kind of low to the ground. Mowing high just keeps your grass a little bit healthier, and it does help it shade out those weeds. And the last thing about mowing is just mow often. Make sure you're going through, getting rid of those seed heads as soon as you can. If you don't want to mow often, do what I do. When you go take the dogs outside in the morning, just pluck those seed heads, get them out of there. Just make sure that nothing is going to be going back into your lawn. Then yeah, hand pulling, just making sure, if it's easy to pull, something like a dandelion, you can yank it out really easily. Some crabgrass, after you've watered, you can yank that out really easily. There are a few weeds I do not recommend hand pulling. One of those is nutsedge. So if you pull nutsedge, it will actually, like a hydra, create 2 more plants because it has a couple little bulblets attached to those roots that will create new plants. So if you do have nutsedge, just follow the mowing. And if you can, maybe just remove the leaves at the base just to get rid of all of its energy. Pulling it from the root is not a sustainable solution. And last thing to think about with weeds, spot treat them. We have dandelion doom for broadleaf weeds. This will get rid of your clover, your moss, dandelions, obviously, broadleaf plantains, things like that. It is non-selective, or it is selective, excuse me. So this means that you can put it on your grass. It's not going to harm your grass. There is iron in it, so it might stay in a darker color for a little bit, but that'll go away after the first irrigation or precipitation event. Weed Warrior is a little bit more intense. It is a non-selective herbicide, so this would be something for like your crabgrass, Dallas grass, Poa annua / annual bluegrass. Although this may harm your turf grass. So if you are applying it to your lawn, make sure either your grass is dormant or you are planning to reseed or resod that area in case there is a lot of damage. All right. Any questions, Will, we've had so far?
None so far, no.
Alrighty. We're gonna go right into repairing. So after you've, made all those beautiful bare spots, getting rid of those weeds, or maybe it's looking a little thin, or like in Texas, and you're getting those bare spots because your grass started greening up and then it froze, damaging that area. You're going to want to repair those areas. First thing to think about, if you have pet spots, you can use our pet patch product. I would use this before any seeding or sodding just to make sure you kind of pull all of those contaminants out of the root zone, making it a better place to grow grass. So go ahead and apply that pet patch. Wait about 24 hours to make sure that it's fully absorbed into the soil, done its job, and then you can start to focus on seeding or sodding. One thing, make sure to look at your temperatures. 65 to 85 is a pretty good range. You want to make sure, you're not going to get any freezes later. If it is really, really wet, maybe hold off on sodding for a little bit. Just you don't want to keep it too moist or too dry. So once you've decided, temperatures are good, environmental conditions are good, you can move right into adding that grass into your lawn. You just want to remove any dead material. So if there is like a dead grass patch, rake that over, loosen up the soil a little bit in that area, add some topsoil or compost, and then you can lay your sod, your plugs, sprigs, anything like that. If you're doing something like a sprig or a plug, you can move those runners and you can kind of pin them down where you want them to go. Seeding, broadcast it with your hand, broadcast it with a spreader. If you are seeding, just make sure to add a little bit of a cover to that seed just to make sure there's no wildlife getting hold of the seed and it's not going to get washed away anytime you want to irrigate it. So a 1/4 inch of topsoil is perfect. I know some people like to use hay. Hay is okay too. You just want to make sure you're checking it for any fungal problems or any weed seed development as well. All
And
right.
for more of an in-depth sort of explanation of sod versus plugs and seed, that was all in the lawn care basics webinar. So if you did not attend that and have any questions there, we're happy to chat later in this webinar, but also great material in the lawn care basics.
For sure.
Perfect. All right. And transitioning over to fertilizing here. So keeping in mind that, again, we want to consider the environmental conditions. So one of the key factors that we like to keep in mind is that the ideal application window is when temperatures are between roughly 50 degrees and 85 degrees. Now, this is assuming that this is an ideal time to apply the pouches. So what I mean by this is we want to ensure, firstly, that the grass is not stressed. So if the grass is currently, if you had a heat wave and the grass is currently showing signs of heat stress or drought stress, I wouldn't apply one of our nutrient pouches. If the grass is not currently growing, so for example, if it's dormant and it's during the winter or even during the summer, if we end up entering a little bit of a dormant period due to extreme temps, again, I would hold on to those nutrient pouches. So on the left-hand side here, you do see the My Plan page with recommended application dates. Again, these are the ideal application dates, I would say, right? This is when we recommend applying these pouches, but there is a good amount of flexibility with these dates. So if for whatever reason you're unable to apply a pouch, or if you feel, you know what, I'm not quite sure that this is really going to benefit the grass right now, I always recommend exercising caution. Feel free to reach out to us, but be confident that we'll still be able to incorporate that pouch as long as we progress through the season and conditions allow. Secondly, when considering mowing, this is just a recap again from the lawn care basics webinar. Before an application, we do recommend mowing beforehand, essentially just to open up that grass canopy, if you will. Really make sure that the contents of the pouch are being absorbed and any of the iron is essentially staining that grass. But after an application, we do want to wait roughly 2 days or so until mowing, just to make sure we're not essentially cutting that new growth and the contents of the pouch have been absorbed. And in relation to watering, keep in mind that before an application, this is assuming that the grass is healthy, then we would recommend just a light watering, essentially, just to make sure that the pouch is best absorbed. Now, the reason that we recommend doing so is if when applying a pouch, this would not be considered a watering, right? So we really want to focus on a deep and frequent watering schedule. So if you're set to water on the day that you're looking to apply a pouch, just keep in mind that walking throughout the lawn for 15 minutes with the hose most likely is not going to count for what we would consider to be a deep watering. So If the grass is healthy, let's go ahead and lightly water the lawn before applying the pouch to ensure it's absorbed. But then after an application, keep in mind that the pouches are liquid, right? So if we water within 24 hours or so of an application, then we're essentially diluting that nutrient pouch. The same goes for natural precipitation. So if you have a free rainstorm roll in, immediately after applying an application, always feel free to reach out to us. We can chat through essentially how best to proceed, but really want to minimize the chance of essentially having any water or any rain diluting the pouch. I did also want to highlight here, we do offer a couple of nutrient pouches here, which don't contain nitrogen. So this Lawn Aid pouch here is a preventive summer stress treatment. So essentially, this pouch is not necessarily one that I would be as concerned with fitting into, well, is the grass currently stressed, right? This is really an ideal pouch to put down before summer stress sets in. But from an over-fertilization perspective, we have a bit more flexibility with Lawn Aid here. Additionally, some customers may receive green out. So if you live in a region with fertilizer blackout dates where you are unable to apply fertilizer containing nitrogen or phosphorus, this is a great pouch. Green out does not contain nitrogen or phosphorus, and this is something that you would be able to incorporate. If you do live in a region with blackout dates and you are not receiving green out, rest assured you are still receiving the optimal pouches for your lawn, essentially just making sure we still reach the desired nitrogen load over the course of the season for your lawn.
And something to keep in mind, guys, if you do end up getting behind, life gets in the way and you aren't able to apply anything and you end up with a buildup of fertilizer pouches, feel free to reach out to us, webinars@getsunday.com, and we can help you come up with a schedule if needed.
All right, lastly, and then transitioning to our maintain slide. So this is a slide that I feel could honestly be a webinar all by itself. We're going to tackle a few different ideas here, and it's just a jumping point. So keep in mind that we want to consider the environmental conditions over the entire course of the season. I'm sure everyone is tired of hearing us bring this up, but this is crucial, right? So if you start to notice a change in the lawn, have you seen a spike in temps recently? Have you had a cold event, for example? Has there been a change in the amount of natural precipitation? Have you received much more rain recently and your watering schedule hasn't changed? Could this area be receiving too much water? Have you completed an audit of your sprinkler system this season? Could it be that certain areas of the lawn are receiving more water than others? Are there some areas which are not receiving any water at all? Secondly, we recommend keeping track of these changes as well. So if you do have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us, but it's extremely helpful if you can say, hey, we hop on the call and say, on this date, I noticed that the lawn was starting to brown in this specific area, and then this seemed to correlate with factor X, right? And then it seemed to spread throughout the lawn by this date. It's great to have essentially this general idea. And then once we're looking to prep the lawn the following season, we can also keep this in our mind to see if there are any changes that we need to implement. And then thirdly, developing a plan, essentially identifying how best to proceed. So if we take a look at this image here, this is what we may tend to see, I would say, in the springtime or summertime. And this could be a number of factors, right? If we have these patches throughout the lawn, it could be potentially this is a warm season grass which does not have a high cold tolerance, and there could have been a freeze that essentially damaged that grass or is essentially slowing its green up. We may need to repair the area, or it might just have a little bit slower of a green up this season. This could be an area where we have uneven sprinkler coverage, and essentially some areas are remaining more moist than others. And essentially, we're starting to see a fungal bloom take hold. This could also be a sign of compaction. So essentially, if we see some areas that are not draining well or that tend to remain moist, again, not necessarily just a sprinkler issue, could be when it rains, certain areas tend to drain a little bit quicker than others. This could be that we may need to discuss aerating and or top dressing either this season or as part of the lawn preparation the following season. What I want to highlight here, though, is that just because there are brown patches does not mean that I would default to applying fertilizer. This is one of the questions that we commonly receive over the course of the season of, hey, I'm starting to see my lawn starting to change, or, this is what I'm starting to notice. I think I need an extra pouch, or I think I need to jump to my next nutrient pouch. There are situations where that would be beneficial, but there are also situations where it would not. And so, for example, if this is an area where a fungus is taking hold, or a fungal bloom is taking hold, for example, there are certain blooms which would essentially be exacerbated if we apply fertilizer. So we just want to be mindful with not just defaulting to applying fertilizer at the first sign of a change in the lawn. This image here from Michigan State brings up a separate factor to consider. So if there are areas within the lawn which are starting to yellow or brown, doesn't seem to be correlated to a change in the environment. So not necessarily an area that's received more sun exposure than other areas, or an area that doesn't receive as much water. It could still correlate, right? Sometimes these stressors can all have a compounding effect, right? But generally, I would say with pest pressure, we tend to see them start to develop in somewhat odd locations. So if there's an area here where it's starting to yellow, what we may discuss is considering if there is a turfgrass pest. So this could be grubs, for example, where essentially if you were to complete a pull test or a tug test, then the grass wouldn't necessarily be well rooted anymore after the grubs essentially target those roots. So we'd be discussing how to manage the grubs, whether it would be essentially adjusting our cultural practices, or do we need to repair the area? Do we need to apply a product to essentially kill the grubs? There are a number of factors we could discuss there. Or could it be a separate turfgrass pest? For example, do we need to complete a soapy water flush test to see if we can drive anything to the surface? So turfgrass pests are an additional factor which can sometimes slip the mind, right? They can be not necessarily a logical location within the lawn for where we would expect stress to develop. So a separate factor here where I would not default to applying fertilizer to improve the area, right? This would really be, we want to focus more so on repairing the lawn and identifying if we need to remove these pests and how they were able to take hold, whether it was a thin lawn, and we essentially just need to maintain this area a bit more. And lastly, it could just be heat or drought stress, right? And so over the course of the summer, of course, everything seems to align just at the same time. We could be dealing with watering schedule change. We could be dealing with increasing temps. We could be dealing with pest pressure. But again, it could be as simple as just the increase in temps and potentially the watering schedule not necessarily being adjusted. And so there are certainly situations, especially with watering restrictions, where it may be beneficial to consider, do we let the lawn go gold essentially during the summer? Maybe it's beneficial to, instead of trying to maintain that green lawn, if there is extreme heat, maybe we essentially hold on to our nutrient applications and we can return to these applications and essentially proceed once conditions allow. So again, this is a situation where if we were to apply fertilizer to a lawn that was showing signs of drought stress, that would not improve the situation. It would exacerbate the stressful conditions here. So just as a brief recap, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but if you see weak roots, this could be pest damage. If the lawn feels spongy or discolored, it could be a fungus or a fungal bloom. And lastly, if you notice a dry or a blue-gray hue, essentially showing signs that the grass wants water, then that may be a sign of drought stress. So again, we could most likely create a webinar for each of these topics. When you think about it, we could chat specifically about a fungus, about pests. So happy to dive into this into more detail, but this is just keep these in the back of your mind as the season progresses, that we don't just want to default to a fertilizer application if we see a change in the lawn. Lastly, do we have any questions here before we wrap up with our resources and
there is one thing that we start to see a lot at this time, and it's dealing with mushrooms. So mushrooms are not an inherently bad thing in your lawn. They usually actually show that your lawn is healthy, that is producing enough organic matter. If they do bother you, it's totally okay to go out there and remove those. But just know that, they're not harmful to your lawn. They're not toxic. They're not going to be causing any problems. If anything, they might just be telling you that you need to water your lawn a little bit less. But for the most part, mushrooms are a beneficial part of your lawn's ecosystem. Other than that, well, I think that's everything.
Well, wonderful. We truly appreciate everybody being here today. Just as a brief recap, again, our blog, The Shed, is a great resource providing articles discussing how to test for compaction, for example. So essentially providing a bit more information regarding lawn preparation each season. Again, always feel free to follow up with us, but the Shed is a great starting point. Additionally, our YouTube channel is a great resource as well, providing chats with our very own Dr. Frank Rossi from my alma mater, and discussing essentially common lawn issues that we'll see over the course of the year, and also home to the other webinars we have recorded. And lastly, please feel free to reach out to us at webinars@getsunday.com if we may be of any assistance. We're happy to dive into any questions you may have, or to essentially provide a deeper explanation if there are any questions there. But with that, we hope we see you at a future webinar, but keep an eye out. So the follow-up survey, this was order of operations, warm season?
For southern lawns or warm season, yes.
Warm season lawn. But have a great rest of your day, everyone. Truly appreciate you all being here.
All right. Take care, y'all.